Okay, well, let's start with Augustine. Augustine is really the first great Christian philosopher. The first person who comes up with an overall philosophical system and works it out in a way that is highly sophisticated and puts him in the philosophical pantheon of great thinkers. That's not to say people like Plato, Origin, and Tertullian, and Athanasius and so on weren't doing important things philosophically. They were. But Augustine is the first person who really deals in great detail and a great level of sophistication with a lot of philosophical problems. Now, by the way, a note on the name. When I was a child, everybody said Augustine. Now everybody tends to say Augustine. If you look it up in the dictionary, they're both appropriate pronunciations. They're both acceptable. So whichever you say is fine. And I'm not sure quite how these fashions change. But in any event, he was living at the end of the classical period. He could be considered the last great ancient philosopher or the first great medieval philosopher. He stands on a period of transition. He was born in 354 in North Africa. He ended up journeying to Milan, to Rome, and then eventually returning to North Africa, where he became a bishop. He died in 430. This was in the waning days of the Roman Empire. In fact, he died as Vandals were laying siege to the city of Hippo. And so there was a huge amount of turmoil going on. This was still the Roman Empire, it was still classical civilization, but it was really in its dying century. Rome traditionally is thought to have fallen in 476, but the disaster started as early as 378 when there was a major battle in the Balkans that the Roman army lost to the Goths. And so, really, throughout his entire life, Roman civilization was in retreat. And so, there's a sense in which Augustine was looking at the Roman Empire with Christianity now the official state religion. This is after the Council of Nicaea. But on the other hand, with a sense that things were collapsing around him. Now, it's unclear exactly how devastating some of these Germanic invasions were. We'll come back to that later because after Augustine, we're going to take a 500-year leap and move to Anselm. And so we'll have to talk about why there's a 500-year gap in the history there. But in this case, in Augustine's case, there isn't really that kind of gap. There is a sort of tradition in the Hellenistic world leading up to this. He's writing in Latin, so there's a sense in which he's not really part of that Hellenistic world. He's not intimately connected to Greek thought. And yet, as we'll see, almost everything he does is a response to something important in Greek thought. And what he's doing is taking what he identifies as a major theme and presenting an alternative that he thinks of as distinctively Christian, that is different from the kind of answer to fundamental questions that you're going to get if you just study the routine sort of group of Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Hume, Kant. And so he begins a pattern in medieval philosophy of posing those fundamental philosophical questions and coming up with unique answers. Okay, so let's start with the Confessions. This is a remarkable book in a number of ways. It is the first autobiography, and it's a very unusual autobiography. It's essentially all a prayer. It's all directed at God. And so it's him talking about his own life, but talking directly to God. I think it's always useful to see how books begin. One time I was watching Jeopardy, and there was a category, famous first lines. And there were things like, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Tale two. Yeah, you didn't say what is. What is that? Sorry, yes, tale of two things, yes. I heard, yes, man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. This is a social contract. Exactly. We're social contract, okay? Now we're going to see, he plays on first lines, especially from Aristotle, and gives his own alternatives. But if we look at the first line of the Confessions, you are great, Lord, and highly to be praised. Great is your power, and your wisdom is immeasurable. So he begins, how? Tell me about that. You are great, Lord, and highly to be praised. What do we learn about this book just from that first line?
This is going to be a decorational word. And he already ascribes to the transcendent law of God.
Okay, good. So one thing we can say right away is, yes, you are great, Lord. If we identify what's happening here. You can say, first of all, this is upwardly directed, right? You are grateful. The audience is God. Okay? You are grateful. It's directed directly to God. And so it is addressed as a prayer. It's something addressed not for the sort of casual reader or whatever, but for God. And it starts by saying, you are grateful. And indeed, highly be praised. Great is your power, your wisdom is immeasurable. So yes, there's this idea of transcendence. And in fact, immeasurable is the term he uses. Which suggests an important gap between our own concepts and the nature of God. Okay, so already we can say God is transcendent, God is higher, God is above. Augustine, yes, above the world, and his greatness is really immeasurable. Okay, something that lies beyond our full capacities to understand. And so there's a sense in which this ties into a theme we've already been dealing with. A number of people talked about the ascent of the soul, starting with Plato, but going through a number of other thinkers, Origin, Gregory, and Nyssa, and so on. And we've got that image now of Augustine reaching up, saying, you are great, Lord, looking up and sensing this greatness that is beyond his own ability to grasp. That's a theme that's going to run throughout the Confessions. Now, let's go on. Man, a little piece of your creation, desires to praise you, a human being bearing his mortality with you. Okay, now, what do we learn from that? Here is, right, God is up there somewhere. Here is creation. And now mankind is just a little piece of creation. And of course, Augustine is just one little person. And so he starts not with this idea of an autobiography. This book is about me, because I'm so great. Okay? Most autobiographies actually have a little bit of that character. Let me tell you something about myself. That's not the way this is starting. He is starting by saying, I'm talking to you, God, you who are so great, you who are above the world. I am just a little tiny part of mankind, and mankind is just a little tiny part of your creation, and your creation is really something that has no ability to grasp your full greatness. And so we've got this gap between creation and the transcendent God, and then mankind is just a little piece of that, and he's just a little piece of mankind. And so we get an image here that reminds me actually of an experience I once had in high school debate. There was this team from New York who came in and said, okay, the affirmative team is talking about blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, what part of the problem is that? It's only this small part. So they tore a piece of paper. Yeah, see, it's only this part. But then they're dealing with only that part. So they rip it again. And then they said, but moreover, their plan is only addressing half of that issue. So they rip it again by they start with this big piece of paper at the end of this whole thing. So the affirmative plan is really all about that. And so it was sort of devastating. Luckily, we were not the opponents. We by then were out of it, and this was the final round as we were watching the two best teams in the tournament. But I think this was the Liberty New York team, who in those days was very good. But in any event, that's what he's doing here. He's really saying, look, there's God, and then there's creation, which is vast enough, but God is much greater than that. And then mankind's just a little piece of creation, and just a little part of that. So he's starting out with a claim, not of his own significance, his own insignificance. Now, nevertheless, to praise you is the desire of man, a little piece of your creation. You stir man to take pleasure in praising you, because you've made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. Now, tell me about that part.
It reminds me of Aristotle's teleology, so people aren't directed towards a specific end. They don't fulfill that. Well, I guess you become most human and you build the most of your potential as you reach that end.
Excellent. Okay, good. Another famous first line. Aristotle, the Metaphysics, first line. None of you are fans of Kirby Lane Cafe? It's on a Kirby Lane t-shirt.
Oh, all men by nature desire knowledge.
Yes! All men by nature desire knowledge, or desire to know, many translations have it. And the Kirby Lane version is crossing that out and writing in Kirby queso. Okay? But yes, all men by nature desire to know. Yes?
Because this is very important for later on in the book. Because he says, no, it wasn't my fault. I didn't choose to be against you. It was just that I was too ignorant to know, my Lord, and you slowly were preparing me for conversion. Even when I was in error, this was the slow, simmering cooking.
Good. That's a very important theme, too. This takes a long time. As we'll see, he starts with a kind of philosophical puzzle about how it's even possible to know God at all. And the fact that it happens slowly and gradually becomes a crucial part of his answer.
It's Aristotle's, look, I didn't actively rebel against you knowingly. It was my own ignorance that caused me.
I see your point. Yes. Okay, good. It is going to connect to Aristotle in all sorts of ways. Now that's interesting because by this point in the ancient world, Aristotle wasn't really all that significant. He was not any longer one of the major players. His star was sort of in decline. However, it's, I think, impossible to read the Confessions without seeing Aristotle in the background, because almost every chapter is organized as a critique of Aristotle in some way or other. And here we start, actually, you're right, with several important themes of Aristotle on the table, and already being returned. One is this claim. I'm not, in Greek, anthropos would just mean mankind, so don't take the gender of that seriously. This just means all people by nature desire to know. And he also talks about the function of a human being. What is our function, according to Aristotle? In the end, that's right, to pursue virtue. But that's sort of at the end of the story. The first answer, when he's saying, yeah, what is my function? He says, well, what's really distinctive about a human being? What's special about it? What makes a human being different from anything else? Good. It has to do with our ability to know, our ability to think rationally, to be rational animals, to carry out rational plans. And so, if you think, yeah, that's what defines us. We're animals, but what makes us different from other animals? Easy to explain how we're different from non-animals. We do animal-like things. Okay? We're capable of motion and we live. But then, when you come down to the question of how we differ from other animals, his answer is, well, rationality. And so, our function is really to act according to a rational plan, he says. Rational activity. Now, I want to reread these lines from Augustine so that we can see that in the background and then see what he's saying. Nevertheless, to praise you is the desire of man, a little piece of your creation. You, stir man, to take pleasure in praising you because you've made us for yourself. And our heart is restless until it rests in you. So what, according to Augustine, is it that all people by nature desire? Okay, right, it's really not, in Augustine's case, it's not just to know, it's to know God, right? It is to praise God, it is to glorify God. And so, yes, we're driven to know, to praise, to glorify. That's what all people by nature desire. Do they desire knowledge just for its own sake? Well, not necessarily. My head is filled with all sorts of knowledge. I mean, partly I have a good memory, partly I'm just old. And when you've been around a long time, you remember a lot of stuff. And so I can tell you all sorts of useless facts. The date of the Peace of Westphalia.
Sorry, the what?
Westphalia. Treaty of Westphalia. 1614. Okay, George Washington was born in 1732. Roberto Clemente's batting average, 1961. 351. Okay, I just don't want crap like this. So it's whatever. And so, do all people by nature desire to know that? Well, no. I mean, how many of you are going to go out and say, oh, Roberto Clemente, yeah, I'd really like to know his batting average for every single year. Rookie year, 1955, 256. Okay? What about 1971? Won the World Series, 320. Okay, it's all there, but it's basically useless except for a baseball trivia contest. Yeah?
In the language, does he make a differentiation between maybe different types of knowledge? So the difference between, like, I know 2 + 2 = 4, and then knowing someone that I'm really close to?
Oh, you bet. Exactly. And that's really my point. I mean, Aristotle would say, well, everybody by nature desires to know, so it's delightful to find out facts, even like that are basically useless. And I think Augustine said, wait, no, my nature isn't just to know things, you know, at random. It's not just knowledge for its own sake that really motivates us as human beings, but what is it that motivates us? Well, sometimes it's, you're right, interpersonal relationships. I might want to know other human beings, and that's different from just wanting to know random facts about history. I might have a desire to know things that are of practical value to me. Indeed, one of the things that's going to be my main goal, according to Aristotle, is happiness, and so I'll want to know things relevant to attaining happiness. But you might say, do we just desire to know for its own sake? For Aristotle, the answer is yes. But I think the answer for Augustine is, well, no. Is my heart restless until I learn the date of the Treaty of Westphalia? Not really. Okay? But is it restless until I know God? Yes. Okay? So there's something intrinsic in me that drives me upward. You might say, look, knowledge is a sort of horizontal thing. It's, most of the time anyway, it's about other things in the world. So the thought is, yeah, I'm a human being, and yes, I might want to know other people, I might want to know other things about creation, but notice all of that is sort of horizontal. And that's what Aristotle stresses. But Augustine's saying that's not what's really fundamental. What really is fundamental is something like this spiritual quest, this vertical desire. That's the one he thinks is really crucial. That's the one that is really essential to us and distinctive of us as humans. He thinks it is fundamental. It is essential. It is part of who we are, that we have this vertical quest. And moreover, it is something that is distinctive of us. Have you ever seen a raccoon drop down and pray? I would know, but I don't think so. There isn't really that sort of vertical desire about other animals. He's saying that's really distinctive of human beings. That's something special. So, where Aristotle says, here's what's special about us, we are able to act according to a rational plan, and Marx says something different, we're able to actually produce things, we make things, that's essential to us, and various other philosophers have given other answers. His answer is basically, yeah, we have this desire to know, praise, to glorify God, to look upwards. Yeah?
This is going to be very important for Anselm later, because this is the eternal debt that we have, and why sin cannot be covered by our praise. Is because we are made as our function to know and praise and glorify God. So he's going to draw the Augustine later for his argument for death in Christ.
Nice. Okay, very good point. Exactly. Because it turns out, notice in this first paragraph also he says, but look, I'm a being who's trapped in sin. And so I have this desire to know, praise, and glorify God. But can I achieve this? No. And it's partly because of God's transcendence. It's partly because of my own nature. It makes it impossible for me to fulfill this. Notice in Aristotle, he ends up saying, yes, the goal of everyone is happiness. And in fact, hey, we can achieve that. Or at least ideally, we can become virtuous, he thinks. But here, there's a sense in which the goal is one we can't fully achieve, at least not within this life. It's something that is this reaching upward that is really, in a certain sense, unsatisfiable within the framework of this life, partly because of our finite nature and partly because of our nature as sinful creatures. Okay, good. Now, the function in Aristotle, again, rational activity, but here, to praise you is the desire of man, to be a piece of your creation. You stir men to take pleasure in praising you because you've made us for yourself. Well, perhaps, yes, our heart is restless till it rests in you. There's a great song about that, by the way. But anyway, grant me, Lord, to know and understand which comes first, to call upon you or to praise you, whether knowing, wait. Yeah, I don't want to get to that yet. Let me skip that paragraph and we'll come back to it. It's important, but I don't want to get derailed. In seeking him they find him, and in finding they will praise him. Lord, I would seek you, calling upon you, and calling upon you is an act of believing in you. You have been preached to us. My faith calls upon you. It is your gift to me. You breathed it into me by the humanity of your Son, by the ministry of your preaching. Now, our function then is something that is connected to this. Aristotle is saying, look, here's what we all by nature desire, to know. Well then, what is our function? It is connected to knowledge. It is rational activity, the ability to act according to a rational plan, and that is connected to knowledge. It is by virtue of our acting according to rational plans that we're capable of having knowledge. Well, if what is really essential to us is to know, praise, and glorify God, then what is our function? What is it by virtue of which we're capable of, to the extent that we are capable of it, knowing, praising, and glorifying God? It's really worship. That's our function. Okay? Our function is connected to this vertical activity. And so it's really worshiping God that is essential to us. Now, I want to get to this paradox that he introduces in the second paragraph. This is something that is connected to a much broader philosophical theme. It's something Plato talks about at a couple of points. It's something that emerges in the 20th century as a discussion of what is called the paradox of analysis. And here is how Augustine puts it. Which comes first, to call upon you or to praise you, whether knowing you precedes calling upon you? But who calls upon you when he doesn't know you? For an ignorant person might call upon someone else instead of the right one. But surely you need to call upon in prayer, that you may be known. Yet how shall they call upon him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe without a preacher? Now, here's the problem. And really, we can state this much more generally than anything having to do specifically with God or religion or anything like that. I'm searching for something. Do I know what I'm looking for? Well, how would I know? How can I search unless I know what I'm looking for? Okay? So here's really the problem. I say, I'm looking for blah, blah, blah. And then someone says, well, how will you know? When you find it. And here's the idea. You must already know. If I'm looking for a kind of object, let's say I'm looking for my lost pencil, well then, okay, I'm looking for my pencil. How will you know when I find it? Well, I remember what my pencil looks like, right? Easy to answer. Suppose I'm looking for something else. Like I'm looking for a unicorn. How will I know when I found it? Well, what would finding a unicorn look like? Could you know if you had found a unicorn? Actually, some philosophers say no, unicorns are impossible. I think that's absurd. Could you possibly know if you had found a unicorn? Yeah, how would you know?
Pictures.
Yeah, I mean, it would look a lot like a horse, right? But with a horn coming out of its head. Okay? Now, the philosophers who think this is a puzzle say, well, yeah, but how would you know it's really a unicorn, not something that looks a lot like a unicorn? Because, you know, it would have to have the true nature of a unicorn. But there is no true nature of a unicorn, so there's nothing that would ever satisfy unicorns, and unicorns are impossible. End of story. That seems to me absurd. If we found a horse-like thing that had a horn out of its head, we'd say, whoa, we found a unicorn, then we'd investigate its nature, it seems to me. But in any case, what did we think about that? We'd know what we already have the idea of a unicorn, in other words, or at least some kind of idea of a unicorn. We'd know when we found it. Now, when does this become a problem? Well, suppose, as in the Platonic dialogues, I'm looking for the definition of virtue. Now, you could say, wait a minute, you're looking for the definition of virtue? Don't you already know what virtue is? If you don't know what virtue is, how will you know when you found it? Suppose I say virtue is a kind of metal. It's a lot like a candle or could. That's wrong, right? We can all agree that that's wrong. But how do we know that's wrong? If we don't know what virtue is, how do we know when we found the definition of it? So the problem really is, look, if I'm looking for an object, no problem, I've got the idea. But if I'm looking for now, fill in for here some kind of concept, some kind of definition, some sort of analysis, or understanding. The problem arises, how can I possibly know when I've found a proper account, a proper analysis, a proper definition, the proper understanding? How can I know unless I already know what it is that I'm looking for? If I'm looking, for example, for a definition of courage, Socrates will say, well, look, you can't possibly know what courage is until you define it. But you might say, how will I know if I've defined it? Unless I already know what it is. Okay? And that's the paradox. Now, some people have taken that paradox to show so philosophy is pointless. Because, look, you never know whether it was good analysis unless you already knew what you were talking about in the first place. But if you already know what you're talking about in the first place, it needs the analysis, so there's no point to doing philosophy. And that's a serious challenge. I mean, I think it's not right in the end, but nevertheless, it's something that is something you have to respond to. And my own view is usually, look, we have some vague idea that we're looking for. What we don't have is the sort of precise analysis. In the same way that somebody, let's say a geologist might say, actually, what people describe as jade, they're two completely different minerals. They just look a lot alike. Or there might be biological species. You think, oh, there are ants. And then you find out, wait, there are many different kinds of ants. They have different natures and different characters. So, similarly, we start with a vague idea, a general idea, and we get a lot more precise, and there can be a gain in understanding. Now, apply this idea of the paradox of analysis to God. You can say, well, all right, you're exhorting me to pray, to worship, to try to glorify God. But wait, seek to know God. How will I know whether I'm looking in the right direction? Okay? Surely I must already understand God. And so here's the paradox. You might say, look, who are you praying to? Until you understand God, you don't even know who you're praying to. You don't know who you're worshiping, so that doesn't really make any sense. You must already know in order to pray or worship. But how do you know if it's independent of prayer or worship or any other kind of religious activity? Surely you don't just start by knowing God. In fact, if God is above us, immeasurably, incomprehensibly, totally transcendent, then it looks like we don't know God. But then, isn't religion just random? How do you know you're praying to the right sort of being? And so this is the puzzle he really gives us. If you go back and look at it now, I hope it will make more sense. Which comes first? Calling upon you, praising you? Who calls upon you when he doesn't know you? Okay? An ignorant person might call upon someone else instead of the right. There's a sort of interesting issue here, I think, about how religions relate to each other. In the Old Testament, there is a lot of discussion in the various historical books about the priests of Baal and the conflict between those and the priests connected to the temple in Jerusalem. Suppose you find somebody praying to some sort of God. How do you know what God is? Suppose they don't give it. They don't call it Baal. For that matter, suppose they even do. How do you know that Baal isn't just a different name for your God? How do you tell? How do you figure out what direction it is? And suppose, actually, you don't have any particular name for your God. You just say God. You just sort of look upward in this sort of way. How do you have any idea what sort of God you're praying to? And so, his puzzle is really, how can I know? It looks as if I've got to already know in order to do this at all. But if I already know, then it looks like I've already achieved my goal of knowing God. And yet, if I don't know, then how can I have any idea what direction even to look? How would I know when I started to find God? And it's a serious problem. Now, what kind of answer should you give to this? Sort of like, look, either God's unknowable or you already know God. And there's no point to trying to know God or praise or glorify or pray or any of that. I mean, there's no point because look, you already know God. Or he's unknowable. Yeah.
Could you do something about it? It looks like the Maxims, some sort of a negative analogy where he looks at the Maxim's own character and his own virtue, and I, imagine this idea of perfection and whatever he's missing, just that God has.
Ooh, okay, good. So one root, yes, there is a sort of negative root. To would say, look, I can look at my own soul and see various kinds of problems. And indeed, he does that. One of my favorite parts of the Confessions is when he talks about himself as a baby. Okay? And what was he like as a baby? Now he said, look, I don't remember what I was like as a baby, but I have a pretty good idea since I've seen other babies. And what does he have to say about babies? Oh, where is it? Man. Oh, yes, here we go. Yes, this is awesome. Okay. Who reminds me of the sin of my infancy? For none is pure from sin before you, not even an infant, one day upon the earth. He's there quoting Job. He says, who reminds me? Any tiny child now, if I see in that child when I don't remember it myself, what sin did I then have? Was it wrong that in tears I greedily opened my mouth wide to suck the breast? If I were to do that now, gasping to eat food appropriate to my present age, I would be laughed and very properly rebuked. At the time of my infancy, I must have acted reprehensibly. But since I couldn't understand the person who admonished me, neither custom nor reason allowed me to be reprehended. As we grow up, we eliminate and set aside such ways, but I've never seen anyone knowingly set aside what is good when purging something of false. Okay, so what's really wrong? He says, well, I personally watched and studied the jealous baby. He couldn't yet speak it, pale with jealousy and bitterness, glared at his brother sharing his mother's milk. Who is unaware of this fact of experience? No. Okay, so he starts out by saying, well, I have a sinful nature. And my nature is so sinful, it's there, evident when I'm on me. Now why? Why are babies sinful?
Because they envy the nurse's milk. It's so great. I love that too. Because we know because he longs to strangle his brother. But one thing interesting about, I think, what responsibility is how he says, look, we tolerate this because we'll know it goes away. He goes, we don't really care when a baby swings his arm because we go, oh, how cute. You know, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
Even though the baby's intent is to harm you for not giving him what you want. But he says, as we grow older, and it kind of reflects Paul's 2 Corinthians 13, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, but when I grew up, basically, I put away childish things. And that's what he's arguing here, like an ethical responsibility. The more knowledge you have, and the less ignorance, the more your selfishness becomes unacceptable in society.
Okay, good, yes. So, indeed, there's a selfishness, and it's something we hope we grow out of, but notice it is our nature that we have to somehow control to grow out of it. The baby is selfish. It's all about me when I'm a baby, right? Feed me, change me, you know, hold me, warm me up, it's all me for the baby. Okay? And indeed, it can be bitter, like, no, don't have anything, no, me. It's all like that. And indeed, we forgive babies because we realize that's their nature. You've seen these videos? Charlie, that hurts. It's sort of like that. Yeah, I mean, we recognize that's the nature. That has to be grown out of, but that gives us some idea of the direction. Now, the second thing, I want to come back to something you said right at the beginning, which is, this is a gradual process. And so, if you think about a Platonic dialogue, for example, it's not like you really get a full definition of courage or virtue or whatever it is right away. It's something that you refine as you go along. Somebody says, what is courage? Well, yes, it's standing and fighting, not running away. And they say, well, wait, is it only in the midst of battle, in an infantry battle, that people show courage? Well, no. Okay, so, and then it goes along, and you get this richer and richer conception of what a good answer would look like. So you start with only the vaguest idea of what you're really looking for. And then you learn more about it, and you figure out more of what you do as you go about the search. So it's not like, wait, either we know now or we'll never know. No, if you think about these quests for knowledge, they happen gradually. And the same thing is true, by the way, in mathematics. It's true in the sciences. It's not like people say, well, yes, I want to understand the nature of, I don't know, a diamond. And somebody says, well, you already know. Because how do you even know what a diamond is? If you don't know what a diamond is, how can you inquire into its nature? But if you already know what it is, there's nothing to find out, so science is pointless. Now, we wouldn't take that very seriously, right? We say, well, look, I got some idea what a diamond is. Admittedly, I'm not that great at telling diamonds from cubic zirconia or whatever, but nevertheless, I've got some idea what a diamond is. And as I inquire, my question, my understanding will develop, and I'll get better and better understanding. Well, it's the same thing here. And so he says, look, it happens gradually. My function is to seek God, to try to know God, to praise God, to glorify God. Do I know who God is right away? No. Can I ever know